You know the smell. The second the automatic doors slide open at the Hungry Jack's near the highway exit, that warm, salty, slightly smoky cloud rolls out and wraps around you like a familiar coat. There's the faint crinkle of waxed paper as the staff fold a Whopper into its wrapper, the squeak of the soft drink lid being clicked into place, the soft thud of a tray being slid across the counter. You bite, and the bun gives, and the sauce is sweet and tangy, and for half a second you are 9 years old again, on a road trip with your dad, and everything in the world is fine. That is the Hungry Jack's experience as it lives in our memory. Now I want to tell you what tends to live behind the counter, in the freezer, in the supply contracts, and in the corporate paperwork, because the gap between the two has been getting harder to ignore. This is not a hit piece on burgers, and I want to say that plainly before we go any further. I have eaten at Hungry Jack's, in airports, in suburbs, on country drives, and at 1 in the morning when nothing else was open. The burger has been part of the Australian commercial landscape since 1971, when Jack Cowan opened the first one in Innaloo, Western Australia, because the Burger King name was already trademarked here by a takeaway shop in Adelaide. That is a lovely piece of trivia. What is not so lovely is the slow accumulation of complaints, ACCC scrutiny, worker testimony, and supply chain reporting that has built up over the last few years, and which most regular customers have never been walked through in any organized way. The chain runs across more than 425 locations as of recent franchise disclosures, with concentrations across Western Australia, Queensland, and New South Wales, reflecting the original Cowan expansion footprint that grew out of Perth in the 1970s and pushed eastward through the 1980s and 1990s. I am not the kind of person who tells you to stop eating fast food. I am the kind of person who thinks adults should know what is in front of them, then decide. The chain operates more than 400 stores across Australia, employs thousands of people, and serves millions of customers a week. And that scale matters. Scale changes everything. Scale is why $1 saved on cooking oil per store, multiplied across the country, becomes a corporate decision. Scale is why a shortcut at one franchise becomes the template for an entire region. Scale is why the things that go wrong in fast food go wrong at scale too. So we are going to walk through this together, calmly. We will hear what former workers have said, then trace the meat, and the oil and the freezer items, then look at franchisee complaints and food handling reports, then end where the money lives, which is the corporate ownership structure that ultimately decides everything that lands in your wrapper. If you've ever wondered what is actually going on behind the counter of one of the most familiar fast food chains in the country, give this video a like and stay with me. The information matters more than the algorithm, but a like helps the algorithm push it to the next person who needs it. Let's start with the people behind the counter, because everything else flows from there. Concerns have been raised in multiple Australian media reports over the last 2 years about the working conditions inside Hungry Jack's kitchens, particularly for younger staff and casual workers. Documented complaints filed with the Fair Work Ombudsman and reported in outlets like The Guardian and the ABC have flagged issues ranging from underpayment of penalty rates to inadequate breaks during peak service. In 2023, a wage underpayment matter involving the parent company Competitive Foods Australia, which operates the majority of corporate-owned Hungry Jack's stores, was the subject of mainstream coverage and prompted statements from the company about back pay processes. In 2024, the broader enterprise agreement environment across the Australian fast food sector came under renewed pressure, with the Retail and Fast Food Workers Union publicly contesting the rollover of legacy agreements that, in their assessment, had locked in penalty rate carve-outs below modern award levels for years. Hungry Jack's has been named in that broader conversation alongside other major chains, and the Fair Work Commission's review of these legacy agreements continues to draw attention to enterprise bargaining patterns that long predate the current cost of living squeeze. The point here is not to litigate any specific case. The point is that the people who handle your food are operating, by their own accounts in many of these reports, under time pressure, short staffing, and high turnover. When workers are stressed and rushed, the small disciplines that food safety depends on get harder to maintain. That is not a moral failing of any individual worker. It is a structural reality of fast food kitchens at scale. What does that look like in practice? Former staff have described, in forum posts, Glassdoor reviews, and consumer advocate interviews, scenarios where prep timers are run past their limits during a rush, where lettuce and onions are topped up rather than rotated, and where the time temperature requirements for held food are stretched on busy nights. The Australian Food Safety Information Council guidance is explicit that hot-held food should sit above 60 degrees Celsius and that cold-held product should sit below 5, with a 4-hour cumulative window for product moving in and out of the danger zone. None of this is unique to Hungry Jack's. It is the open secret of the entire fast food category. The reason it earns a spot in this particular conversation is the volume. When millions of meals a week are produced under those conditions, statistical accidents become inevitable, and your individual visit is a roll of the dice. Then there is the meat. Hungry Jack's beef is sourced primarily from Australian suppliers, and the chain has, to its credit, leaned heavily into the local sourcing story in its marketing. Australian beef is, by global standards, generally a strong product. The complication is in the patty itself, which is a flame-grilled, formed beef product that includes salt, water, and a binding agent. Industry observers note that the moisture content of formed fast food patties is higher than what you would find in a butcher's mince, which is part of why the bite feels softer than a pub burger. The fat content tends to sit around 20% for that same reason. The deeper supply chain runs through processes that have, historically, included OSI Group's Australian operations in Wodonga, the same global processor, whose Chinese subsidiary was the center of an expired meat scandal in 2014 that drew international attention and prompted a long round of audits across OSI's worldwide footprint. The Australian arm of OSI has not been associated with that 2014 incident, but the parentage is part of the supply chain reality customers rarely see, because the formed patty business in Australia is highly consolidated, and the names on the back of house cartons are not the names on the front of house menu. None of this is hidden. The nutrition information is on the website. What is less obvious is the difference between the marketing image of a thick, hand-formed patty and the standardized, machine-pressed reality, which lands closer to the truth of what fast food actually is. The Whopper bun itself, on closer reading of the ingredient panel, contains a list that includes wheat flour, water, sugar, yeast, soybean oil, salt, wheat gluten, and a stack of dough conditioners that typically includes mono, and diglycerides of fatty acids, calcium propionate as a preservative, and emulsifiers like sodium stearoyl, lactylate, and datim, the kind of bakery additives that keep the bun consistent across 40-degree summer days and 12-degree winter mornings without going stale on the warmer rack. The faint sweetness that lingers on the inside of the bun, the one that pairs so well with the smoky char of the grill, comes from the high fructose component in the dough formula, which is industry standard for soft roll fast food bread. In our opinion, the framing oversells the product. Move to the chicken. The chicken in the Whopper Junior chicken variants and the various crispy chicken sandwiches comes through global poultry supply chains where the bird itself, the breading, the marination, and the par frying are all done at processor level before the product is shipped frozen to stores. The store does not breaded the chicken, the store fries it. That is standard for the category, and it is the reason fast food chicken tastes consistent across the country. It is also the reason concerns have been raised by groups like Choice Australia and various animal welfare organizations about the upstream conditions in which the birds are raised. Hungry Jack's has not been singled out as worse than competitors on this front. It has, however, been included in the broader conversation, and the chain's chicken supply chain has not been as transparent as some customers might assume. Specific marination and breading ingredients across formed chicken products often include sodium phosphates as moisture retention agents, modified starches as binders, and monosodium glutamate or yeast extracts in the seasoning blend, which is a category-wide pattern rather than a Hungry Jack's anomaly. Chicken processors that supply major Australian QSR chains include Ingham's and Baiada, both of which have been subjects of broader supply chain commentary across the years. Now let's talk about the oil. The fryer oil in fast food kitchens is not changed after every shift. It is filtered, topped up, and replaced on a rotation that is governed by corporate policy and franchise compliance. Documented complaints from former Hungry Jack's staff, posted on consumer forums and reported in Australian retail trade press, have alleged that in some stores, the oil change cycle has been stretched beyond the recommended interval to control costs. The category standard rotation is a daily filter, a top-up, and a full change typically once or twice a week depending on volume. But the trigger for a full change is often the polar compounds reading from a handheld tester, with industry guidance suggesting replacement when total polar materials exceed 24 to 25%. We cannot verify every individual claim, and Hungry Jack's would dispute any blanket characterization. What we can say is that the question of fryer oil age is one that food handling auditors take seriously, because oxidized cooking oils develop compounds, including aldehydes and trans fatty isomers, that have been linked, in nutrition science literature, to inflammatory markers when consumed at high frequency. The crispy chips that people drive across town for are cooked in oil, whose age is, in our opinion, the single biggest variable that determines how that chip actually sits in your stomach. The smell of an overtired fryer is unmistakable once you've noticed it. It carries a faintly acrid, almost cardboard edge note in the back of the nose, sharper than fresh oil, with a hint of burnt starch underneath, and it lingers on the chip itself in a way fresh oil never does. The visual cue is just as telling. Fresh canola or sunflower oil pours pale gold, almost translucent. Oil at the end of its life pours a deep bronzed brown that you can see through the glass tank if you happen to walk past the open kitchen. The freezer to fryer pipeline is the next layer. The chips, the onion rings, the chicken pieces, the hash browns, and the various seasonal sides are all delivered frozen, stored frozen, and dropped into oil at the moment of order. This is not a Hungry Jack's secret. It is how the entire quick service restaurant industry operates. The reason it matters in this specific conversation is the marketing language. When a chain leans on the words fresh, real, or made to order, the average customer pictures something that is closer to a pub kitchen than to a frozen bag into a fryer line. The legal definition of fresh in food marketing is, as Choice Australia has noted in multiple investigations into fast food advertising, considerably looser than the consumer assumption. In our opinion, that gap is where most of the betrayal feeling comes from when people start paying attention. Quick favor before we get to the heaviest part of this. If you've made it this far, leave a comment with the last Hungry Jack's order you placed. It helps the algorithm, and it builds a useful record of what people are actually buying. Franchisee complaints are the next layer, and they matter because franchisees are the small business operators who actually run most of the stores. Australian Financial Review and other business press coverage over the last few years has documented tensions between Competitive Foods, the master franchisee that owns and operates roughly half the network, and the independent franchisees who run the rest. The complaints, summarized across multiple reports, have included royalty pressure, supply chain markups on ingredients that franchisees are required to buy from approved channels, and marketing levies whose value back to the individual store has been questioned. The Franchising Code of Conduct, administered by the ACCC, requires specific disclosures around these arrangements, and the ACCC has been increasingly active in fast food franchise oversight since the 2018 changes that gave it stronger civil penalty powers in this area. Franchisees who feel squeezed cut corners. Cut corners in food service show up in your wrapper. The cause and effect chain here is not theoretical. It is the operational reality of any franchise system under cost pressure. And Hungry Jack's, by the volume of public reporting, is operating under more pressure than the marketing suggests. The 2024 industrial relations conversation across the broader QSR sector, including renewed Fair Work scrutiny of the legacy enterprise agreements that have governed pay structures across multiple chains, has been a particularly visible chapter, with public commentary from union officials and franchise lawyers placing chains like Hungry Jack's inside a wider regulatory conversation that consumers rarely see. I noticed this myself last week, pulling into a Hungry Jack's drive-thru on a long drive home, late on a Sunday. The kid at the window looked exhausted. There were 2 staff visible behind him in a kitchen built for 5. The order took 11 minutes from the speaker to the bag. The chips, when I unwrapped them, were warm but not hot, slightly soft, and tasted faintly of older oil, that particular cardboard edge note that fryer oil picks up as it ages. The Whopper was fine. The bun had that slight stale chew. That suggests it had been sitting in the warmer too long, with the crust gone slightly leathery and a fingernail pressure dent that did not spring back the way fresh bread should. None of this is dramatic. None of it is a public health crisis. But it is the lived texture of what scale plus pressure does to a meal, and it confirmed for me, in the smallest possible way, that the gap between what the marketing promises and what the wrapper delivers is real, and it is widening. I noticed something else as I pulled away. The bag itself smelled stronger of fryer than of beef, which is a small data point, but a telling one. The kid at the window also barely made eye contact, not out of rudeness, but the kind of distracted half-presence that comes from running on a 6-hour shift with no break. Food handling reports filed with state authorities, including the NSA Food Authority and equivalent bodies in Queensland, Victoria, and Western Australia, have documented intermittent compliance issues at individual Hungry Jack's stores over the years. These reports are public. They are also routine across the entire fast food category. McDonald's has them. KFC has them. Local kebab shops have them. The reason to flag the Hungry Jack's pattern specifically is the chain's high market share and the relative volume of customer-facing reports surfaced by consumer advocacy outlets. None of the reports point to anything that would, in our opinion, justify panic. They point to the ordinary, accumulated risk of eating regularly at any high-volume fast food chain, and they suggest that the assumption of corporate-level food safety oversight is at best partial. Let's hit the climax of this, which is the corporate ownership picture, because everything else makes more sense once you see who is actually steering the ship. Hungry Jack's in Australia is owned and operated by Competitive Foods Australia, the private company built by Jack Cowan, who is one of the most successful business figures in Australian fast food, and who also sits on the boards of major media and food companies, with a long-standing position on the board of Fairfax-era media interests, and a continuing role at 10 Network Holdings during its restructuring years, and an estimated personal wealth that has placed him repeatedly on the Australian Financial Review Rich List, with reported holdings stretching across food, media, and primary production. Competitive Foods is the largest Hungry Jack's franchisee, but it is not the global brand owner. The Hungry Jack's name and the underlying Burger King intellectual property are licensed from Burger King Corporation, which is owned by Restaurant Brands International, the multinational that also owns Tim Hortons, Popeyes, and Firehouse Subs after a string of acquisitions across the last decade. Restaurant Brands International is, in turn, majority controlled by 3G Capital, the Brazilian-Swiss private investment firm, famous in business circles for its zero-based budgeting approach, which is essentially a continuous cost-cutting methodology applied to portfolio companies. The same playbook 3G applied at Anheuser-Busch InBev and at Kraft Heinz, with results that are still being debated in business schools. When you pull the camera all the way back, what you see is a beloved Australian brand operating under a global corporate structure whose primary financial discipline is the systematic identification and removal of cost. That is the lens through which every supply contract, every staffing decision, every oil change schedule, and every marketing claim is ultimately filtered. The smiling cartoon mascot is the front of the house. The cost-out spreadsheet is the back. Concerns have been raised, in business reporting and franchisee forums alike, about whether the relentless pursuit of margin is compatible with the customer experience promise the brand has built over 50 years in this country. Sit with the weight of that for a moment. The same Whopper that tastes like a road trip memory is being assembled inside a system, whose primary financial discipline, applied through several layers of corporate ownership stretching from Perth to Toronto to Sao Paulo, is the continuous removal of cost. Every onion slice, every pickle thickness, every gram of mayonnaise, every second of grill time has been measured, modeled, and optimized. The patty itself sits on a chain-driven flame grill, riding past the burner on a calibrated speed setting that delivers the same crust pattern every single time, anywhere in the country. There is nothing about that meal that is accidental, and nothing about it that has not been engineered to a target cost per gram. In our opinion, the answer to whether this is compatible with the customer experience promise is increasingly visible in the wrapper. The ACCC has, over the last 2 years, taken a sharper interest in fast food advertising more broadly, with particular attention paid to claims around freshness, sourcing, and value pricing. Hungry Jack's has not been singled out in the way some chains have, but the broader regulatory drift is real, and any chain leaning hard on a fresh and Aussie story is, in our reading, sitting closer to the regulator's radar than it would like. Here's the exhale, because the picture is genuinely complicated, and a fair conversation has to acknowledge it. Hungry Jack's is not, in our opinion, an unsafe place to eat. The food meets Australian regulatory standards. The beef is mostly local, the kitchens are inspected. The brand has a long history of community involvement, junior sports sponsorship, and Australian-owned pride that genuinely matters to a lot of customers. The point of this video is not to suggest that a Whopper is a public health emergency. The point is to argue that the marketing language has drifted further from the operational reality than most customers realize, and that anyone eating there more than once or twice a month deserves to know what they are actually buying. So what is worth eating if you do find yourself in the line? The straight beef Whopper, ordered fresh during a busy lunch rush when turnover is high, is the most defensible item on the menu. The volume keeps the patties hot, the buns fresh, and the lettuce moving. The plain hamburger and cheeseburger, ordered the same way, are similarly defensible. Salads, where available, are a reasonable lower-risk choice, with the caveat that pre-cut leaves in any fast food context have their own time-temperature considerations. Black coffee is fine. Bottled water is fine. The kids' meals, where you can see exactly what is in them, are not the worst choice in the world for an occasional roadside stop. What is worth avoiding? The deep-fried items late at night, when the oil has been working all day. The chicken items where the par-fry timing matters most. The frozen novelty desserts, whose ice cream machine has its own well-documented industry problems across all chains. And anything reheated, anything that has been sitting under a warmer, anything where the staff member's body language tells you the ticket has been hanging too long. Trust your eyes and your nose. Both are smarter than the menu board. The faint sweetness of fresh oil and the clean grilled meat note of a freshly cooked patty should hit you immediately when the wrapper opens. If the dominant smell is the bag itself, or the cardboard tray, something upstream has gone slightly off, and the meal in front of you is not the one the marketing was designed to sell. Here is a verification framework you can apply to any fast food chain, not just this one. Step 1. Look at the bin behind the counter where the wrappers are tossed during prep. A clean bin and a busy bin tell you different things about turnover and pace. Step 2. Check the chip cooker. If the oil looks dark, smells acrid, or the chips come out the color of strong tea, rather than pale gold, the oil is past its window. Step 3. Watch the shake or soft serve machine. If a sign says it is unavailable, that is good news. It means the cleaning cycle is being respected. Step 4. Listen to the kitchen. A kitchen that is calm and audible is a kitchen that is keeping up with timers. A kitchen that is yelling, with managers running between stations, is a kitchen where small things are being missed. Step 5. Look at the floor near the dump station. Spills, buildup, and dropped product on the floor tell you about the rhythm of the shift. Step 6. Note your wait time. 12 minutes for a simple order at off-peak hours is a signal that staffing is below where it should be, and staffing is the upstream cause of most fast food failures. Step 7. Save your receipt. The receipt has the store number, the time, and the staff initials. If something is wrong, that is the only paper trail you will have. Step 8. Press the bun gently before you bite. A fresh bun has a soft give that springs back. A stale bun under a warmer has a denser, tighter resistance that does not recover its shape. Step 9. Check the lettuce edge. Fresh, shredded lettuce has a clean white edge. Lettuce that has been sitting in the topping bin for too long develops a faint pink-brown oxidation along the cut line. Step 10. Watch the gloves. A crew that changes gloves between protein handling and bun assembly is a crew with active discipline. A crew that doesn't is telling you, without saying a word, exactly where this kitchen sits on the priority spectrum. Step 11. Look at the temperature display on the cold prep rail if it is visible. A working chain runs that rail at 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. A drifting display in the 7 to 10 range is a quiet warning sign that the rail is overworked or underserviced. Step 12. Pay attention to whether your order arrives in the order it was assembled, or whether items have been sitting under heat lamps waiting for the slowest item to catch up. The smell test on the bag at the moment of handover tells you almost everything about how the timing inside that kitchen is actually working. We have gone through worker testimony, meat sourcing, fryer oil practices, freezer to fryer reality, franchisee strain, food handling patterns, and the corporate ownership chain that ultimately governs all of it. The verdict is not that Hungry Jack's is uniquely bad. The verdict is that, in our opinion, it has drifted further from its own marketing than a lot of regular customers realize, and that the ownership structure behind it is built around continuous cost reduction in a way that makes the drift very hard to reverse. You can still eat there. You should not, in our view, eat there blindly. The road trip memory is real. The system that produces it today is not the same system that produced it in 1971, and the gap between those two systems is the entire reason this conversation exists. The brand still trades on the warmth of that memory, while the operational machinery that produces each meal answers to a financial discipline imported through several layers of corporate ownership. The honest move, for anyone who eats there more than occasionally, is to hold both truths at once. The food is fine. The system that produces it is not the same one we remember. Knowing the difference is the entire point. Here is the one specific physical action I want you to take after you finish this video. The next time you walk into any Hungry Jack's, stop at the counter and ask one question before you order. Ask what time the fryer oil was last filtered or changed. The staff response, the body language, and the manager's reaction will tell you more about that store in 20 seconds than any review online ever could. Do that just once, and you will never look at the chip cooker the same way again. Tell me in the comments what answer you got.